According to legend, the Japanese are descended from the storm god Susanoo. Dominion over the earth passed from him to the grandson of the sun goddess Amaterasu, whose successors became the first mortal, yet still divine, emperors of Japan. In the 7th century, the influence of the god emperors declined as Buddhism from China replaced Shinto, the ancient worship of the sun and ancestral spirits. Power passed to provincial governors who recruited bands of mercenaries to defend and expand their territories. A feudal system evolved of daimyo and samurai, the lord and his men-at-arms, the hereditary warrior caste. The sword represented the soul of the samurai and was the emblem of his authority. Its possession was denied to all men of lesser rank. The samurai carried 2 swords into battle, one for use in hand-to-hand combat, and another shorter, wakizashi sword, with which a defeated warrior was required to commit ritual suicide. By the 20th century, imperial rule had been restored, and a revival of Shintoism became the vehicle for a campaign of territorial expansion. The armed forces believed they were the successors of the samurai, and echoing their spirit, the nation learned that duty weighed heavier than a mountain, that death was lighter than a feather. Japan was indoctrinated with a spirit of unquestioning obedience to Emperor Hirohito, the living god and missionary of Japanese hegemony. Into this environment was born Kian Matsuo, the simple son of an elementary school teacher from Kumamoto Prefecture. Matsuo was descended from the Kikuchi clan, which fought alongside the ruling Kyushu dynasty in the battle between clans in the 14th century. He was steeped in the tradition of Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code of behavior which demanded rigorous self-discipline, complete indifference to physical needs, and total subservience to authority. Shinto taught that samurai killed in battle were reunited as demigods in the afterlife. This recognition awaited all warriors at the Yasukuni Jinja Shrine in Tokyo, Japan's holiest shrine for those honorably killed in battle. The samurai death wish, coupled with the warrior code, demanded an almost obsessive display of courage far beyond that of ordinary men. The Kure Naval Academy lies on the shore of the inland sea at Etajima, at the foot of Japan's sacred Mount Fuji. Here, legendary standards of excellence produced the warriors of the deep, highly trained young naval officers imbued with the samurai tradition. At Kure, the emphasis was on patriotism and the fighting spirit. Matsuo was to graduate from here in September 1938, 5 years after Hirohito had embarked on his ambitious campaign of conquest in Asia. Naval cadets learned of the crucial role surprise played in Japan's earlier great naval victories over Russia in 1904. The emergence of the submarine was now seen as offering the means of repeating that tactical surprise in the wider conflict ahead. This dangerous new field of warfare was also tailor-made to the samurai's need for dramatic gestures of heroism. A new development of underwater weaponry was the midget submarine. These fragile craft held out the prospect either of spectacular success or of certain death in failure. Matsuo completed the training course in midget submarine tactics in April 1941. 26 men had been selected for midget submarine duties. They were posted to a unit conducting midget submarine trials on the Seto Inland Sea, the glorious expanse of water which runs through the center of Honshu. The midgets had many design faults, which operational experience had failed to rectify. Their crews had to endure cramped stations and frequent equipment breakdowns. During one such trial, Matsuo's midget suffered an engine malfunction and plunged downwards, coming to rest on the seabed. Matsuo and his crewman were unable to rectify the trouble and now faced a slow and tortuous death from asphyxiation. Submarines in distress would normally release air to attract craft on the surface, but the size of the midget restricted the amount that could be released. If the air bubbles failed to attract immediate attention, the undersea craft was probably doomed. But this was no honorable death for the samurai. For the Japanese, the true courage of the Bushido warrior came in knowing when to die. Four hours passed, but Matsuo had released air intermittently. Both crewmen had also preserved their energy to ensure clean air within the craft. Matsuo's calm action proved successful when the midget was eventually discovered. After the trials, Matsuo was posted to the Imperial Naval Staff to assist in the planning of a surprise submarine and airstrike against the American Pacific Fleet. His duty was to ascertain America's capacity to resist a submarine attack in Pearl Harbor. Matsuo traveled to Pearl Harbor disguised as a seaman with the Japanese Merchant Marine. There, he judged firsthand the most effective means of employing both large and midget submarines in a surprise attack. The Japanese task force of 23 warships, including 6 aircraft carriers, intended to crush the American fleet with one blow. Matsuo's midgets would finish off what was left of America's naval hardware, even if the airstrike failed. On November the 11th, 1941, the Japanese Navy's 3rd Squadron of 9 submarines slipped out of Saiki Bay, bound for Pearl Harbor. 5 days later, a 2nd squadron sailed from its base at Yokosuka. On November the 18th, Matsuo's mother submarines left Kure for Kamikakubi, where they would embark their midgets. Matsuo, because of his knowledge of conditions at Pearl Harbor, sailed with the attack force flagship, the I-22. On board, he briefed the captain on navigation markers and channel buoys. On the other 4 mother submarines, the midget crews prepared themselves for the fate of all true samurai warriors. The midgets were launched in the early hours of the morning. They would lie submerged all day while the aircraft attacked. They would then make a surprise attack after sunset when the Americans thought the strike had ended. Again, the maneuver of the classic samurai. The periscope of one of the midgets was sighted by an American minesweeper, but luckily for the Japanese, the contact was not reported to the commander-in-chief at Pearl Harbor. None of the midget submariners expected to return alive. They were determined to sink the American warships, even if they had to ram them. But the decisive damage was inflicted by the Japanese naval air squadrons. All the midget submarines were lost in the action, and one of them suffered the ignominy of being captured after it was washed ashore. Thus, all but one of these warriors of the deep died according to the practice of their code. Throughout the rather spurious recovery stage, the I-22 hove to offshore. Matsuo, now weary and red-eyed, was bitterly disappointed that he had not been chosen for the Pearl Harbor operation. He did not have long to wait. An unwitting survivor of the Pearl Harbor raid was the American light cruiser, the USS Chicago, which had sailed 2 days before the attack. Now based in Sydney, the Chicago attained celebrity status among the people. The regatta-like atmosphere which surrounded the Chicago's arrival helped lull Sydney into a false sense of security. Darwin, the northernmost city in Australia, had been bombed 3 months previously, and the Battle of the Coral Sea only weeks before brought the threat of invasion still nearer. A fantastic welcome greeted the American sailors, a dream come true for a generation of Australian women nurtured on pre-war Hollywood legends. The British admiral in charge of Sydney was Rear Admiral Gerard Charles Muirhead Gould. He was a man steeped in all the traditions and chivalry of an age now passing. He had fought the Bolsheviks during the Allied War of Intervention and had now been posted somewhat unwillingly to what he considered a colonial backwater. Lieutenant Commander Hinchcliffe was an Australian officer on Gould's staff at the time.
Few in Australia were emotionally, consciously aware that we were a people at war. Darwin had been bombed, but the censors had seen to it that we got little information. We felt that it had been just a minor skirmish.
On May the 13th, a squadron of Japanese submarines sailed south from Truk Island. On board was a special attack force of midget submarines. Now off the Australian coast, Japanese officers pored over charts detailing Allied warship anchorages and defense emplacements. The attack force leader was Lieutenant Kian Matsuo. On board the mother submarines, coded orders were received from the Imperial Naval Headquarters in Tokyo. The Emperor himself was briefed on the preparations for the attack. Despite the seemingly lackadaisical attitude of the Sydney Harbor defenses, American officers suspected the presence of enemy submarines and what were likely Japanese warriors actually in the hills behind Sydney because of messages intercepted on board the Chicago.
When we were anchored in Sydney Harbor for peaceful time, a week or so, we noticed every night at midnight there was someone off the coast sending a message in Japanese. And then one night at midnight we heard it again, but this time it was back up in the hills, the Blue Mountains, back of Sydney. So I reported it to the Australian communications at Garden Island, and they said, yes, we know it's up there, and we're looking for it, and wanted to know if we had any portable radio direction finders that they could use to help locate it. And they said, we know we have located within a 30-mile triangle, but we can't pinpoint it, but we're working on it.
The major role in the defense of this, the most important Allied naval base in the South Pacific, was vested in a group of converted private pleasure craft, dubbed by the locals the Hollywood Fleet. One such pleasure craft, which bore a naval commission, was His Majesty's Australian ship Sea Mist, commanded by Lieutenant Reg Andrew of the Royal Australian Naval Volunteer Reserve.
The Hollywood Fleet was their name because of the outbreak of war with Japan. Australia had no patrol boats. They commandeered all the luxury motor cruisers that were on Sydney Harbour, 12 of them, in fact.
Admiral Gould regarded the crews of the Hollywood Fleet as weekend sailors and restricted their use of naval equipment. Radio communications between patrol boats, for example, were limited to hourly situation reports.
If an enemy came at 5 past the hour, it was just too bad. No one could talk to you until the next hour came along because there was nothing officially going on. With this in mind, when we were off duty, all our ships were off duty in base, none of them had their radios turned on, so no one could contact them, and we could not see any signal station or receive any messages except by water.
On February the 7th, 1942, an unmarked aircraft carried out a daring flight over Sydney, taking photographs of naval installations. The aircraft had been launched from the deck of a submarine lying on station some miles off the coast. This aircraft later made similar flights over other Australian ports, but was never identified as an enemy. On May the 30th, the Japanese made another reconnaissance flight over Sydney, circling the USS Chicago twice.
A Japanese plane flew over Sydney Harbor. I did not see this plane myself, but I received a report that it had been observed by the officer of the deck in the Chicago. He was an aviator, and he recognized it as a Japanese plane. Whether or not this plane was observed by the Australian authorities is not known to me.
The reconnaissance aircraft had been catapulted from the ocean-going I-21, 30 miles east of Sydney. On returning to the submarine, the pilot, Sub-Lieutenant Ito, reported the presence of American warships in the harbor. Matsuo's attack was planned to take advantage of the full moon. This was the moment for which Matsuo had dedicated his life. The preparation for the samurai's final and fulfilling encounter with the enemy. Despite wartime restrictions, the ferries continued to traverse the world's largest natural harbor. A stenograph recording device at an anti-submarine station registered metallic objects crossing two magnetic loops between the harbor heads. Ratings from the Australian Navy manned the station 24 hours a day. Pulses recorded on the stenograph were checked by visual contact of the harbor traffic. On board the mother submarines, the time for the farewell ceremony had come. This was an intricate ritual of cleansing and paying their respects to their emperor and living god, Hirohito. Matsuo had washed and purified himself with water and alcohol. He had dressed in a fresh uniform and perfumed himself according to tradition. He received his formal orders from the attack force commander and was presented with his sword, which he would take to his almost certain death. Matsuo and his mate Sasuku then paid their respects to Emperor Hirohito at a shrine on board the mother submarine. Sake, the warm rice wine that symbolizes success in life, passed their lips from cups bearing Hirohito's personal symbol, the chrysanthemum, the flower which heralds the glorious Japanese autumn. The midgets were launched underwater from the deck of the mother submarines. The crews now passed through an interconnecting hatch. When the hatch of the midget was sealed, Matsuo bade the mothership farewell, then gave the order to release the chocks restraining his craft. At Tresco, the Admiral's official residence, Muirhead Gould was hosting a dinner party attended by the Chicago's Captain H.D. Bodie.
So he says, Nick, Mac, Patty, Whack, leave the
The
dog alone.
Cuttable, a passenger ferry before the war, had been requisitioned and converted to a barrack ship to accommodate Allied mariners. On board were seamen from Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and the Netherlands.
Then boarded the best seats at the Tivoli, apart from the orchids. What about a couple of cups of Kai, son?
Yeah, sure.
Well, he can afford it. Those Yanks are on 3 times the whack our boys are getting.
At 7:55 p.m., a ferry from Sydney's Circular Quay to the northern harbour suburb of Manly crossed the indicator loop.
Dead on time, the 1955 to Manly.
The first midget submarine to enter the harbor was the Ha-14, commanded by Lieutenant Chuma.
Bloody contraption's got the shakes again.
There's no other visual contact. Apart from the ferry. Must be a twitch in the mechanism again.
After passing the loop, Chuma headed further into the harbor at periscope depth in the wake of the Manly ferry. Suddenly, the midget struck a boom net. Using the sword-tooth cutters mounted forward, Chuma maneuvered his midget halfway through the net, but eventually was trapped by the conning tower.
It could just be a fishing boat.
It could be a lot of things. Here, just there. Look. You see? Strangest looking fishing boat I've ever seen.
Bloody mine!
Maybe. Aye, that's close enough. Where's the Yaruna? Can't see a bloody thing.
It's over there. I think.
Well, come on, Jimmy. Put some muscle into it.
James Cargill, the Maritime Services Board watchman, who first noticed the unusual movement in the water, proceeded to the Aroma, a Channel patrol boat hove to nearby. On board, Sub-Lieutenant Ayres declined to approach the net in case the metallic object caught there was a magnetic mine, but he ordered a stoker to accompany Cargill back to the net. The second midget to cross the indicator loop was commanded by Sub-Lieutenant Ban. The time was 9:48 p.m.
In the net. Over.
Sir, patrol launch Euroma on the boom reports a metallic object with serrated edge on top. It's caught in the net and moving with the swell.
Probably the axe blowing silly buggers there are good.
Still, we better have Euroma radio a complete description, keep the record straight. I'll let the old man know what's going on. He'll still be doing with
Euroma, this is Signal Station. This is Signal Station. Received and acknowledge your message. Close in to make a full description.
Signal Station. Rear Admiral Muirhead Gould.
Aye, I bloody thought so. So we, sub? Come on, let's get back.
It must be some sort of naval wreckage.
Aye, and I'm Bonnie Prince Charlie. Good God, man, if you don't do something about it, we'll finish up with no navy left in the harbour.
Sir, to come straight on over.
On the beacon. Full speed ahead. Full speed ahead.
Ayres had now summoned HMAS Lolita, then patrolling at the other end of the boom net. The Port War Signal Station reported these developments to Gould, who became more and more irritated at the interruptions.
Hello? It's a sub, all right. A baby sub. But it can still do a hell of a lot of damage. Stand by depth charges. Standing by.
At 10:30, the patrol boats reported that the object trapped in the net was a submarine. A full hour had passed since the midget was first discovered. By ancestry and training, the samurai is well versed in the Bushido law that life offers no higher goal than death in the service of the emperor. When a warrior dies with words affirming the god emperor's virtual immortality, he too will become a warrior god. These were the passwords to paradise.
Well done!
That's it. God has spoken. General alarm. Presence of enemy submarine at boom net is suspected.
But half the shop's transmitters are closed down.
Then we do it ship by ship.
You mean
ship by bloody ship, yes.
Between the heads, Matsuo's midget was also intercepted and attacked.
Another two, as far as we can ascertain. The second sub was depth charged by the Yandra. There's been no further sighting. It looks like a hit. The Chicago fired on the third down at Garden Island. That's dropped out of sight also, but there's been no confirmation of a hit.
Order all ships to be darkened immediately. The anti-submarine vessel Bingwa to go to immediate notice.
The harbour traffic, the ferries are still running.
The more traffic that's moving out there, the better. Chances are it'll keep the submarine down till daylight.
Having dived to evade the Chicago salvo, Van's midget, now out of sight, stalked its quarry.
Wake appeared at about 20 or 30 degrees to the axis of the longitudinal axis of the ship, and it was obviously a torpedo wake. And everybody said, "Look at that! Look at that!" And so Captain Bodie, he looked. He turned and he walked over to the side of the bridge, and he said, "That's the motor launch going by."
Stop! You gotta stop! 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
Van's second torpedo was also wide. Suddenly, there was a huge explosion under the catapult with fatal effect. Van's craft then mysteriously disappeared. To this day, the whereabouts of Van's midget submarine or the bodies of Van and his crewman remain a mystery. After being depth charged, Matsuo had hidden on the seabed in the outer harbor for almost 4 hours.
Up!
At 3:01 on June the 1st, Matsuo crossed the indicator loop. The Chicago sighted a submarine entering the harbor just moments before. At 10 minutes to 4, Matsuo was again sighted by a British merchant cruiser HMS Canimbla. There was now little he could do except hide from the barrage of depth bombs.
Clear, to stop! No, sir!
Go.
Adjust the setting to 50 feet!
That gives us all of 4 seconds to clear out before we go up to the damn things as well.
That's 50 feet! Stand by the very pistol! Ready! Put the charges! Charges, gun!
Matsuo's submarine was yet again detected and attacked with depth charges by the Sea Mist, commanded by Lieutenant Reg Andrew.
And just as I was about to order the coxswain to release another charge, he called out to me from after the ship where he was looking after the depth charges, "There are 2 more behind us, sir." And I naturally looked round, and very, very clearly were 2 more conning towers, exactly the same as the one I'd seen that I was attacking, and they were both within 50-yard radius of me behind. And the first one, I recall very clearly, as all around the conning tower was a very large escape of air and bubbles coming up, quite a big escape of air, and it appeared to me in a very short period that it was sinking.
Any sign of it? What's the damage down there?
We've lost 1 engine.
Fuck!
Kian Matsuo, the school teacher's son who had risen to the rank of true warrior, had fulfilled the expectation of the samurai spirit. His moment of true immortality had come. According to Bushido, eternal life awaits the warrior who takes the ultimate step in the spirit of attack.
I can understand why a bright young naval officer in their Navy would be anxious to get aboard a tin can submarine such as these miniatures were and carry his weapon to the enemy and perhaps be able to do as much damage from such a small vehicle as one might expect from a large submarine or from even an aircraft carrier.
I don't think there was anything fanatic about them. I just think they were highly trained and highly motivated and dedicated. But I think they had a very poor weapon.
We thought of them in an animal type perspective, but I also respected their fighting ability. They were extremely courageous. I had admiration for them as well as contempt.
In Sydney Harbor, Australians inspect a Japanese submarine that ventured too far from home. Its mechanism almost intact, the midget undersea craft never had a chance to discharge its torpedoes. Here are the tubes. Removing the firing mechanism. Dangerous business. It might explode. The torpedo's gyroscope, an ingenious device that directs the course of the torpedo after it leaves the submarine. This is one marauder that did no damage. Australians blasted it with depth bombs.
Despite claims that 3 or 4 midgets took part in this, one of the most audacious actions of the Second World War, the wrecks of only 2 submarines were ever salvaged. 19 Allied sailors died when Band's torpedoes struck the cuttable.
A draft of stokers, these are the unfortunate boys. They'd just joined cuttable from Flinders Naval Depot. New recruits, this would be their first ship. And they were quartered in the bottom deck of the cuttable.
On June the 3rd, 8 young Allied seamen were buried with full naval honors. Matsuo and his fellow warriors were also accorded military honors at their funeral service. Admiral Gould ordered their coffins draped with the rising sun flag of Japan. The 4 fallen samurai were then cremated, as was the tradition of the Japanese.
I have been criticized for having accorded these men military honors at their cremation.
Such honors as we hope may be accorded to our own comrades who have died in
enemy hands. But I ask you, should we not accord full honors to such brave men as these? It must take courage of the very highest order to go out in a thing like that steel coffin.
Theirs was a courage which is not the property, the tradition, or the heritage of any one nation. It is the courage shared by the brave men of our own countries, as well as of the enemy.
How many of us are really prepared to make 1/1000th of the sacrifice that these men made? This is patriotism of a very high order.
The ashes of Matsuo and his comrades were returned to Japan, where his fanaticism and daring is recognized even today. Be it an omen for the future, many Japanese still believe his spirit lives on among the cherry blossoms of Yasukuni Jinja, the temple built in memory of the warrior demigods fallen in their emperor's name.